know what I thought when I first saw humans? Soft, pathetically, ridiculously soft. Pink skin that bruises if you look at it wrong, no natural armor, no claws, no fangs worth mentioning. They walk around on two legs like they're asking to fall over, and they make more noise than a dying Grakthul in an echo chamber. I was wrong. Spectacularly, monumentally, embarrassingly wrong. My name is Vorthak 9, Senior Tactical Observer for the Galactic Council's Outer Rim Defense Initiative. I've been watching species rise and fall for 300 cycles, and I've seen enough battles to know the difference between prey and predator. Humans, I was absolutely certain, were prey. The morning everything changed started like any other rotation on Kepler Station. The orbital outpost hung in space like a metallic spider web, all gleaming corridors and observation decks. It served as a neutral ground where various species could interact without anyone getting their tentacles in a twist. The council elders were there for their monthly summit, discussing trade routes and territorial disputes with all the excitement of watching paint dry on a glacier. I was lounging in the observation lounge, my forearms draped over the chair while I watched the humans stumble around in their awkward way. There was one in particular, a young female cadet named Riley Voss, who seemed determined to make friends with every species on the station. She had this ridiculous habit of grinning at everyone, showing off those tiny white teeth like they were supposed to intimidate someone. "Morning, Vorthak," she chirped as she bounced past my table, carrying what appeared to be a steaming cup of that toxic brown liquid humans call coffee. Behind her padded the most absurd creature I'd ever encountered. Just one thing before we begin. YouTube tells me 94.3% of you watching aren't subscribed. Subscribing is free. It really supports the channel, and you'll get more amazing HFY sci-fi stories delivered straight to you. Don't miss out. The humans called it a German shepherd, though it bore no resemblance to any shepherd I'd ever seen. This beast, which Riley had named Thor, was covered in golden fur and had ears that stood up like radar dishes. It was supposedly some kind of companion animal, though why anyone would want a companion that drooled and shed everywhere was beyond my comprehension. "Your pet is leaving fur on the deck plates again," I said, not bothering to look up from my datapad. Riley laughed, that strange barking sound humans make when they find something amusing. "He's not a pet, he's my partner." And Thor keeps himself pretty clean, actually. The animal in question wagged its tail, which I'd learned was apparently a sign of happiness rather than aggression. Honestly, what kind of species evolves a happiness display that looks like a weapon malfunction? "Sure he does," I muttered, returning to my reports. "Just like humans are natural warriors." I should have kept my mouth shut. The first sign of trouble came during the second meal period. The station's proximity alarms began wailing, a sound that made my 3 hearts skip several beats. I rushed to the nearest viewport and felt my skin change from green to pale yellow with fear. 12 Gharvani wolf ships hung in space, like predators surrounding wounded prey. The Gharvani were the kind of species that made everyone else nervous at diplomatic gatherings. They stood 8 feet tall, covered in thick gray fur, with teeth that could bite through titanium alloy. Their ships looked like flying nightmares, all angular edges and weapon pods. "This is Captain Snarl-Fang of the Gharvani Pack Fleet," came the transmission over the station's communication system. Even through the universal translator, his voice sounded like grinding metal mixed with dying screams. "We demand the immediate surrender of the Council Elders. They have been judged guilty of territorial violations in Sector 12. I felt my lunch trying to escape through my breathing vents. The council elders were currently in Conference Room 7, completely defenseless. The station's security force consisted of 20 officers from various species, most of whom were better suited for breaking up bar fights than repelling military assaults. Estimated time until they dock? I asked the nearest security officer, a nervous-looking Zentran with trembling antenna. 17 minutes, he squeaked. Their boarding pods are already launching. 17 minutes. That was barely enough time to send a distress signal, let alone mount any kind of defense. I watched through the viewport as the Gharvani boarding pods streaked toward our docking bays like angry meteors. Each pod probably held 20 warriors, armed and armored for close combat. That's when I heard it. That awful grating sound that humans make when they're happy. Laughter. I turned to see Riley Voss standing at another viewport, watching the approaching Gharvani with what could only be described as anticipation. Thor sat beside her, ears forward, tail still wagging. "Are you having some kind of neurological episode?" I demanded. "Those are Gharvani warriors out there. They're going to tear through our security like tissue paper." Riley turned to me with that same ridiculous grin she always wore. "Yeah, they look pretty tough. Thor, what do you think? Ready for some exercise?" The animal made a sound that was part bark, part growl, and somehow managed to sound enthusiastic about the prospect of facing 8-foot-tall killing machines. "Exercise?" I stared at her in disbelief. "They're not here for a friendly wrestling match. The Gharvani don't take prisoners. They take trophies." "I know," Riley said, checking something on her wrist device. "Mom always said I was too competitive for my own good." I followed her as she jogged toward the main corridor, Thor keeping pace beside her. Other species were fleeing in the opposite direction, heading for the emergency shelters or escape pods. Only this insane human was running toward the danger. "Where exactly do you think you're going?" I called after her. "Conference Room 7, she replied without slowing. "Down." "The elders are there, right?" "Yes, but..." "Then that's where we need to be." The first explosion shook the station like a leaf in a hurricane. The Gharvani had breached Docking Bay 3, and the sound of weapons fire was already echoing through the corridors. I could hear the distinctive howling battle cries of the wolf warriors mixed with the screams of security officers. Riley stopped at a supply closet and began pulling out equipment. Not weapons, mind you, but maintenance tools. A plasma cutter, some emergency medical supplies, and what looked like industrial-grade cable. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice climbing an octave with panic. "Improvising," she said, slinging the supplies into a backpack. "Thor and I aren't exactly equipped for conventional warfare." "Then perhaps you should head for the escape pods like everyone with functioning survival instincts." She looked at me with those strange human eyes, and for the first time, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't fear, wasn't panic, wasn't even determination. It was calculation. Cold, ruthless calculation. "Vorthak," she said quietly. "How many council elders are there?" 12, I replied automatically, representatives from each of the major species. "And how many Gharvani boarding pods did you count?" I had to think for a moment. 12. Exactly 12. Not 13, not 15. 12. She shouldered her backpack and started moving again. "They're not here for a massacre. They're here for a kidnapping. They want the elders alive." The pieces clicked together in my mind with horrifying clarity. The territorial dispute in Sector 12. The Gharvani claimed we violated their hunting grounds. "And now they want leverage," Riley nodded, "which means they'll try to take the elders without too much collateral damage to the station." Another explosion, closer this time. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in an ominous red glow. Through the communication system, we could hear Captain Snarl-Fang's voice again. "Station security, cease your resistance. We have no quarrel with you. Surrender the council elders, and no more blood will be spilled." "Fat chance," Riley muttered, breaking into a run. I found myself following her, though every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to head in the other direction. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was some kind of temporary insanity, but I had to see what this crazy human thought she could accomplish. We reached Conference Room 7, just as the last of the emergency barriers sealed themselves. The corridor outside was empty, except for the bodies of 3 security officers who had tried to make a stand. They were alive, but unconscious, showing the restraint the Gharvani were using. "The elders are inside," I said, pointing to the sealed door. "Those barriers will hold for maybe 10 minutes against Gharvani weapons." Riley was studying the corridor layout, her eyes moving constantly. "Thor, perimeter check." The animal began moving around the area, sniffing at ventilation grates and doorways. I had to admit, for a creature with such a ridiculous appearance, it seemed to know what it was doing. "What's your plan?" I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. "Simple," Riley said, pulling out the plasma cutter. "We make sure the Gharvani get exactly what they came for." Before I could ask what she meant, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the main corridor. The Gharvani had broken through the security checkpoints faster than expected. I could hear their growling voices getting closer. 12 warriors, Riley said, listening intently. Heavy armor, energy weapons, probably standard pack formation. "How can you possibly know that?" She tapped her ear. "Training. Also, Thor's body language. He can hear things we can't." The German shepherd had indeed changed his posture. His tail was no longer wagging, and his ears were swiveling like tracking dishes. A low growl was building in his throat. "Riley," I whispered urgently, "we need to leave. Now, while we still can." She looked at me with that calculating expression again. "Vorthak, I need you to do something for me." "What?" "Get inside the conference room. Tell the elders that help is coming, and whatever happens, they need to trust me." "That's suicide," I protested. "There's no way. There's always a way," she cut me off. "Humans are really good at finding ways." The footsteps were getting closer. I could see shadows moving at the far end of the corridor. "Go," Riley said firmly. "Now." Against every instinct I possessed, I activated the emergency override on the conference room door and slipped inside. The 12 council elders looked up at me with expressions ranging from terror to resignation. "What's the situation?" asked Elder Mechthon, his blue-scaled hide rippling with anxiety. 12 Gharvani warriors are about to breach this corridor," I said. "But the human cadet says help is coming." "The human?" Elder Iskala's serpentine form coiled tighter. "What can one human possibly do?" Through the small window in the door, I watched Riley position herself at the corridor junction. She had set up some kind of barrier using the maintenance equipment, though it looked like it would last about 5 seconds against Gharvani weapons. Thor sat beside her, alert and ready, but still just a fur-covered animal against armed warriors. "I don't know," I admitted to the elders, "but she seems confident." That's when the Gharvani rounded the corner. I've seen Gharvani warriors before, but never up close during combat. They were even more terrifying than I'd imagined. Each one stood over 8 feet tall, covered in advanced battle armor that gleamed under the emergency lighting. Their weapons were charged and ready, and their yellow eyes glowed with predatory intensity. Captain Snarl-Fang was in the lead, his massive form casting shadows across the corridor. "Human," he growled, his voice carrying easily through the sealed door. "Stand aside. We have no business with you." Riley's voice came back, clear and steady. "Sorry, but I can't do that. These elders are under my protection." The Gharvani captain let out what I assumed was laughter, though it sounded more like rocks being ground together. "Your protection? Little human, you are one small creature with no weapons, no armor, and no chance of survival. Step aside, and we will not harm you." "That's a generous offer," Riley replied, and I could hear the sarcasm in her voice. "But here's my counteroffer. Turn around, get back on your ships, and we'll pretend this never happened." The silence that followed was broken only by the low growling of the Gharvani pack. Even through the door, I could feel their disbelief. "You mock us," Snarl-Fang said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Not at all," Riley said. "I'm giving you a chance to leave with your dignity intact." That's when everything went sideways. One of the younger Gharvani warriors, apparently unable to contain his outrage at being challenged by a human, raised his weapon and fired. The energy bolt should have turned Riley into component atoms. Instead, she dove to one side with fluid grace, rolling behind her makeshift barrier as the shot scorched the wall behind her. "Thor!" Pattern 7. I had no idea what Pattern 7 was, but the German Shepherd apparently did. The animal exploded into motion, moving faster than anything that size had any right to move. Instead of charging straight at the Gharvani like I expected, he bounded off the corridor wall, ricocheted off the ceiling, and landed on the shoulders of the warrior who had fired. The scene that followed defied everything I thought I knew about physics, biology, and common sense. The German Shepherd, this supposedly domesticated companion animal, proceeded to treat a fully armored Gharvani warrior like a chew toy. He bit down on the warrior's weapon arm, shook his massive head, and sent the energy rifle flying down the corridor. Then, before the Gharvani could react, Thor leaped to the next warrior, then the next, moving between them like a furry projectile of destruction. But that wasn't the most shocking part. The most shocking part was Riley. While Thor was playing pinball with the Gharvani pack, she had activated her plasma cutter and was doing something to the corridor's structural supports. Sparks flew as she worked, her movements precise and purposeful. "What is she doing?" whispered Elder Mechthon. I watched in growing amazement as she completed her work and stepped back. "I think," I said slowly, "she's preparing to bring down the ceiling." The Gharvani had regrouped, with Thor now darting between their legs like a golden blur. They were trying to get clear shots at Riley, but the dog was making that impossible without risking hitting each other. "Impossible!" snarled Captain Snarl-Fang. "No single creature can face 12 warriors." Riley looked up from her work, and that grin was back. "You're absolutely right. Good thing I'm not alone." She made a sharp whistling sound, and Thor immediately disengaged from the pack, bounding back to her side. The Gharvani raised their weapons, finally having a clear shot. That's when Riley triggered the plasma cutter one final time. The corridor section above the Gharvani pack came down like the wrath of an angry god. Tons of structural material crashed down, separating the warriors from their target. Through the dust and debris, I could hear Snarl-Fang roaring in fury, but his voice was coming from the other side of what was now a very solid wall. In the sudden silence, Riley turned to look at the conference room door. She was covered in dust, her uniform was torn, and she had a cut on her forehead that was bleeding freely. She was also still grinning. "Elders," she called out, "you might want to find somewhere more secure to wait. This is just the first wave. I opened the door, my legs shaking as I stepped into the corridor. How did you know that would work? Engineering training, she said, wiping blood from her forehead. Plus, Thor and I have practiced urban combat scenarios. Different enemy, same principles. Through the rubble, we could hear the Gharvani regrouping. Captain Snarl-Fang's voice echoed from the other side. Clever, human. But this changes nothing. We will find another way to the Elders. You have only delayed the inevitable. Riley knelt down and scratched Thor behind the ears. The animal's tail was wagging again, though he kept his attention focused on the blocked corridor. Maybe, she admitted, but delay is all I needed. What do you mean? She checked her wrist device again. Galactic defense response time to a Code 7 distress signal is 43 minutes. We sent that signal 57 minutes ago. As if summoned by her words, the station's communication system crackled to life, with a new voice. Kepler Station, this is Admiral Kresvak of the Defense Fleet. We have 12 Gharvani vessels in our sights. Stand by for boarding operations. Through the viewport at the end of the corridor, I could see the sleek forms of GDF ships dropping out of hyperspace. The cavalry had arrived, and the Gharvani were now outnumbered and outgunned. Riley stood up, brushing dust from her uniform. Well, that's that. Thor, what do you say we go get some lunch? The German shepherd barked once, tail wagging enthusiastically. As they walked away, I stood there in the debris-filled corridor, trying to process what I had just witnessed. One human cadet and her companion animal had held off 12 of the galaxy's most feared warriors long enough for help to arrive. I thought about all the reports I'd filed over the years, all the species I'd catalogued as threats or non-threats. How many times had I been wrong? How many times had I looked at soft skin and seen weakness, when I should have been looking deeper? Behind the rubble, I could hear Captain Snarl-Fang howling with rage as GDF troops began cutting through to arrest him and his pack. The great Gharvani warriors, terror of the outer systems, had been outmaneuvered by a human and her dog. I made a mental note to revise my threat assessment files. Significantly. 3 days later, I was still trying to file my incident report when Riley Voss knocked on my office door. She looked remarkably normal for someone who had single-handedly prevented an interstellar incident, wearing a fresh uniform and carrying 2 cups of that poisonous human coffee. Thought you might need some caffeine, she said, setting 1 cup on my desk. You look like you haven't slept since the attack. I stared at the steaming liquid suspiciously. This isn't going to kill me, is it? Only if you're really unlucky, she grinned. It's just regular coffee. No sugar, no cream. Thor helped me pick it out. Through my office window, I could see the German shepherd lounging in the corridor outside, somehow managing to look both relaxed and alert at the same time. Several passing crew members stopped to pat him, and he accepted their attention with dignified patience. Your companion has become something of a celebrity, I observed. He's handling the fame better than I am, Riley admitted, settling into the chair across from my desk. The council wants to give us both medals. Thor doesn't really understand what medals are, but he's excited about the ceremony because someone mentioned treats. I took a cautious sip of the coffee and was surprised to find it wasn't entirely terrible. The Gharvani have been extradited back to their home system. Captain Snarl-Fang is facing charges for violation of neutral space and attempted kidnapping. Good, Riley said simply. Maybe next time they'll think twice before threatening civilians. That casual confidence still amazed me. She spoke about facing down 12 armed warriors like it was a minor inconvenience, something that had interrupted her morning routine rather than a life-threatening crisis. "I've been reviewing the security footage," I said, pulling up the holographic display, trying to understand exactly what happened. The recording showed the corridor battle from multiple angles. Watching it again, I was even more impressed by the coordination between Riley and Thor. They moved like they shared a single mind, anticipating each other's actions with perfect timing. "Pattern 7, I said. "What exactly is Pattern 7? Riley's grin widened. "Urban combat training. The military developed it for situations where conventional tactics won't work. Thor and I have been practicing variations for about 2 years." 2 years? You've been preparing for something like this? "Not specifically," she shrugged, "but humans have a saying. Better to have it and not need it, than need it and not have it." Thor, "And I like to stay sharp." I paused the recording at the moment when Thor had launched himself off the corridor wall. "Your companion animal's physical capabilities seem far beyond normal parameters for his species." "German Shepherds were originally bred for herding sheep," Riley explained, "but they're incredibly adaptable. Intelligence, loyalty, physical prowess, the perfect partner for any situation." "Including military combat?" "Thor's not military," she corrected. "He's civilian, just like me. We're both just Kepler station personnel doing our jobs." I replayed the section where she had brought down the corridor ceiling. The precision required was extraordinary, cutting through exactly the right structural points to create a barrier without compromising the station's integrity. "How did you know the collapse wouldn't damage critical systems?" "Engineering schematics," she said, tapping her wrist device. "Every station employee has access to basic structural information in case of emergencies. I just applied some creative interpretation, as if demolishing part of a space station was as simple as rearranging furniture." My door chimed, and Elder Mechthon entered without waiting for permission. His blue scales were bright with agitation, and his 3 eyes were darting between Riley and me. "Cadet Voss," he said formally, "the Council requires your presence for debriefing." Riley stood up respectfully. "Of course, Elder. Thor and I are at your disposal." "Actually," Mechthon's scales rippled nervously, "the Council would prefer to speak with you alone. Your companion can wait outside the chamber." I saw Riley's expression change subtly. The easy smile remained, but something shifted behind her eyes. "With respect, Elder, Thor and I work as a team. We don't separate during official functions." "The animal makes some council members uncomfortable," Mechthon admitted. "Elder Iskala is particularly concerned about having a predator in the chamber." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched Riley's face carefully, noting the slight tightening around her eyes, the way her posture became more rigid. "Elder," she said quietly, "Thor isn't a predator. He's my partner. He's also the reason you and the other council members are still alive." "Yes, well," Mechthon's scales flickered with embarrassment. "The council appreciates your actions, but surely you understand their concerns." "No," Riley said, her voice still calm but with an edge that made my skin crawl. "I don't understand." Thor had apparently sensed the change in atmosphere. He rose from his position in the corridor and padded into my office, positioning himself beside Riley's chair. His tail wasn't wagging. "The animal is demonstrating aggressive behavior," Mechthon said, backing toward the door. "He's demonstrating protective behavior," Riley corrected. "There's a difference." I decided to intervene before this diplomatic disaster got worse. "Perhaps we could arrange a compromise." The debriefing could be conducted in a larger venue where everyone would feel more comfortable. "The Council has already decided," Mechthon said stiffly. "Cadet Voss will attend alone, or not at all." Riley looked down at Thor, who was watching the elder with steady golden eyes. She reached down and scratched behind his ears, and his tail gave a small wag. "Then I guess it's not at all," she said. "Thor and I appreciate the Council's gratitude, but we're not interested in participating in discrimination." Mechthon's scales went pale with shock. "You cannot refuse a Council summons." "Watch me," Riley said cheerfully, her smile returning to full brightness. "Thor, want to go get some lunch?" The German shepherd's tail began wagging enthusiastically, and they headed for the door. Mechthon had to step aside quickly to avoid being knocked over. "This is highly irregular," he protested. "So was 12 Gharvani warriors trying to kidnap you," Riley called back over her shoulder. "But somehow, Thor and I managed to deal with that too." After they left, Mechthon stood in my doorway, looking like someone had just explained quantum mechanics using interpretive dance. "She can't simply refuse," he muttered. "Actually," I said, consulting my data pad, "according to station regulations, she can." Cadet Voss is a civilian contractor, not military personnel. The Council has no authority to compel her attendance. "But the ceremony." "The medals," I shrugged, which with 4 arms is quite an impressive gesture. "Perhaps the Council should reconsider their position on companion animals." Mechthon left in a huff, his scales still rippling with indignation. I returned to my incident report, but found myself thinking about discrimination and partnerships and the strange bond between humans and their animals. An hour later, my door chimed again. This time it was Admiral Kresvak himself, the Defender Fleet commander who had led the rescue operation. He was a massive Thraken, with gray chitinous armor and compound eyes that missed nothing. "Observer Vorthak," he rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. "I understand there's been some difficulty with the Council ceremony." "The Council has concerns about Cadet Voss's companion," I explained. "They want her to attend the debriefing alone." Admiral Kresvak's mandibles clicked together in what I recognized as amusement. "Idiots. Do they have any idea what that human and her partner accomplished?" "They know the facts," I said carefully, "but I'm not sure they understand the implications." "Then perhaps they need education." The Admiral's compound eyes glittered. "Tell me, Observer, what's your assessment of human combat effectiveness?" I thought about my original reports, filed just days ago, describing humans as non-threatening prey species. I believe my previous assessments may have been incomplete. "Incomplete," the Admiral repeated. "Yes, that's diplomatic. I've been reviewing the tactical data from the incident. The human didn't just hold off 12 Gharvani warriors. She outmaneuvered them completely." He activated a holographic display showing the station's layout during the attack. "Look at this. The Gharvani had superior numbers, superior weapons, and superior individual combat capabilities. By every metric, they should have overwhelmed any resistance within minutes. Red markers showed the movement of the Gharvani forces, while blue markers tracked Riley and Thor. The pattern was fascinating to watch. Instead," the Admiral continued, "one human and her companion animal turned the corridor into a tactical nightmare. They used environmental advantages, superior coordination, and creative thinking to neutralize a numerically superior force. The hologram showed the moment when Thor had ricocheted between the Gharvani warriors, disrupting their formation and preventing them from bringing their weapons to bear effectively. The animal's movement patterns are extraordinary, Admiral Kresvak observed. Perfect spatial awareness, split-second timing, absolute trust in his human partner's strategy. The Council sees him as a dangerous predator, I said. The Council sees what they want to see, the Admiral replied dismissively. They look at an animal and see a threat. They should be looking at a weapon. A weapon? Not in the traditional sense, he clarified. But consider the tactical implications. Humans have formed partnerships with other species that enhance their combat effectiveness. They've turned companions into force multipliers. I had never thought of it that way. Thor wasn't just Riley's pet. He was an extension of her capabilities. Together, they formed a unit that was greater than the sum of its parts. Other species have tried similar partnerships, I pointed out. The Zentari use mechanical drones. The Korth employ trained warbeasts. All of which require external control systems or extensive conditioning, the Admiral noted. The human-animal bond is different. It's based on mutual trust, shared experience, and emotional connection, much more reliable than programming or fear-based training. My communication panel beeped with an incoming message. It was from Riley, sent to the entire station command staff. Attention, all personnel. Her voice came through the speakers with that same cheerful confidence. Thor and I will be conducting emergency response training in Cargo Bay 7 at 1400 hours. All species welcome, but participants should be prepared for physical activity. Admiral Kresvak's mandibles clicked again. Clever. She's turning the Council's rejection into an opportunity. For what? Education. She's going to show everyone what humans and their companions can really do. At 1400 hours, Cargo Bay 7 was packed with curious personnel from every species on the station. I arrived early and found Riley setting up what looked like an obstacle course using cargo containers and emergency equipment. Thor was supervising the preparations, his tail wagging as he watched Riley work. Several crew members had brought offerings of food, which he accepted with polite dignity. "What exactly are we going to be doing?" asked Lieutenant Grixpak, a nervous Zentari engineer. "Emergency scenarios," Riley explained. "Rescue operations, crowd control, threat neutralization, the kind of situations that come up more often than anyone would like." Elder Mechthon arrived with several other council members, though they stayed near the back of the gathering. I noticed they kept a careful distance from Thor, who was now surrounded by admirers from at least 6 different species. "First scenario," Riley announced. "Trapped personnel in a collapsed section. Thor and I will demonstrate search and rescue techniques." She activated a holographic simulation that showed a partial structural collapse with multiple casualties. The cargo bay's emergency lighting dimmed to simulate disaster conditions. Thor, search pattern beta. The German shepherd immediately began working through the simulated debris, his nose constantly moving as he tracked scent trails. Within minutes, he had located all 5 victims in the scenario, marking each position with a soft bark. "Now for extraction," Riley said, pulling on safety equipment. Thor, anchor, and guide. What followed was a masterclass in coordinated rescue operations. Thor positioned himself as a stable anchor point, while Riley rappelled into the debris field. When she located the first victim, Thor helped guide the rescue line and provided early warning of structural instabilities. "The animal's sensory capabilities are extraordinary," whispered Dr. Velmore, the station's chief medical officer. "He detected structural weaknesses before our sensors registered them." "Pattern recognition," Riley explained as she completed the rescue simulation. "Thor can hear stress fractures in metal, smell chemical leaks, and detect changes in air pressure that indicate further collapse." The next scenario was crowd control during a station evacuation. This time, volunteers played the role of panicking civilians, while Riley and Thor demonstrated herding techniques. I watched in amazement as Thor managed to guide 30 volunteers through an evacuation route without using any form of aggression. He simply positioned himself at key points, using his presence and movement to encourage people to move in the desired direction. "He's not forcing them," observed Elder Iskala, her serpentine form coiled with interest. "He's suggesting." "Exactly," Riley nodded. "Thor doesn't see crowd control as dominance. He sees it as cooperation. Everyone working together toward a common goal." The final demonstration was combat tactics. Riley had set up targets representing hostile borders, and she and Thor worked through various scenarios showing how they could neutralize threats while minimizing collateral damage. "This is where the real partnership shows," she explained. "Thor can identify threats, disable weapons, and control enemy movement, while I handle technical aspects like equipment sabotage or environmental manipulation." They ran through a scenario similar to the Gharvani attack, with volunteer crew members playing the role of hostile forces. Watching it from the outside, I could see the tactical genius more clearly. Thor's mobility and speed allowed him to disrupt enemy formations, while Riley used her technical skills to manipulate the environment. Together, they turned superior numbers into a disadvantage by forcing the enemies to operate in confined spaces where their weapons became liabilities. "Questions?" Riley asked as the demonstration concluded. Elder Mechthon stepped forward, his scales showing a mix of embarrassment and curiosity. "Cadet Voss, your companion's abilities are impressive, but surely there are risks in working so closely with a predator species." Thor looked up at the elder with what I swear was a patient expression, as if he was used to this question. "Elder," Riley said gently, "Thor isn't a predator in the way you mean. Yes, his ancestors were hunters, but thousands of years of partnership with humans have shaped him into something different. He's a guardian, a helper, a friend." She knelt down beside Thor and scratched his ears. He could hurt someone if he had to, but his first instinct is always protection, not aggression. Watch Riley pulled out a small treat and tossed it near Elder Mechthon's feet. Thor looked at the treat, then at Riley, clearly asking permission. "Go ahead," she said. Thor approached the elder slowly, his body language relaxed and non-threatening. Instead of grabbing the treat, he sat politely and waited. "He won't take it without permission," Riley explained. "Even though he wants it, even though it's right there, he won't act without considering the social situation." Elder Mechthon reached down cautiously and picked up the treat. Thor's tail began wagging hopefully, but he remained sitting. "Give it to him," Riley encouraged. "Let him know you approve." The elder extended his scaled hand nervously, and Thor accepted the treat with gentle precision, careful not to touch the elder's fingers with his teeth. "He's very polite," Mechthon said, sounding surprised. "He's well trained," Riley corrected. "But more than that, he understands social dynamics. He knows you were nervous, so he made himself as non-threatening as possible." Admiral Kresvak stepped forward, his massive form casting shadows across the cargo bay. "The tactical applications are obvious, but I'm curious about the psychological aspects. How does this partnership affect human combat psychology?" Riley considered the question carefully. "Thor makes me braver," she said finally. "Not because he makes me stronger, but because I know I'm not alone. When you have someone you trust completely watching your back, you can take risks you couldn't take otherwise." "And the animal's psychology?" "Thor knows his job is to protect people," Riley said, her hand resting on the German shepherd's head. "Not just me, but everyone under our care. It gives him purpose, makes him happy." As if to demonstrate, Thor's tail wagged enthusiastically, and he looked around at the assembled crowd with bright, alert eyes. "The Council owes you both an apology," Elder Mechthon said formally. "We let fear override judgment." "No apology necessary," Riley replied graciously. "But maybe next time we can skip the discrimination and go straight to the cooperation." The crowd began to disperse, but many crew members lingered to interact with Thor, who basked in the attention with obvious pleasure. I noticed that several species who had been nervous around him before were now offering treats and requesting demonstrations of his various skills. As I prepared to leave, Admiral Kresvak approached me. "Observer Vorthak, I trust your incident report will reflect what we've learned here today." "Absolutely," I assured him, "though I may need to revise several other assessments as well." Other assessments? I thought about all the species I'd catalogued over the years, all the quick judgments based on surface observations. It occurs to me that partnerships might be more common than we realize. We just haven't been looking for them. The Admiral's compound eyes glittered with interest. An intriguing hypothesis, perhaps worth investigating. 2 weeks later, I submitted my final report on the Gharvani incident. It ran to over 300 pages and included detailed analysis of human-animal partnerships, tactical applications of interspecies cooperation, and recommendations for updating Council policies regarding companion animals. The key finding, which I highlighted in bold text, read, "Human combat effectiveness is significantly enhanced by partnerships with domesticated animals. These relationships represent a form of biological technology that other species would be wise to study and potentially emulate." Riley and Thor received their medals in a ceremony that included every species on the station. Thor wore a small collar with his medal attached, and he seemed to understand that it was an honor. He sat perfectly still during the formal presentations, though his tail betrayed his excitement. During her acceptance speech, Riley said something that stayed with me. "Thor and I didn't do anything special. We just did our job. But I think maybe the special part is that we got to do it together." The Gharvani never bothered Kepler Station again. Word spread through their empire about the human and her companion who had turned 12 warriors into a laughingstock. Captain Snarl-Fang was reportedly transferred to a desk job on a mining station in the Outer Rim. As for me, I requested a transfer to the Human Studies Division. There was clearly more to learn about this species and their remarkable ability to form partnerships with other life forms. My first assignment was to investigate reports of humans working with aquatic mammals on the ocean worlds, flying creatures in the aerial cities, and even some kind of partnership with artificial intelligences on the tech worlds. Humans, it seemed, had a gift for turning potential enemies into allies, strangers into family, and individual weakness into collective strength. And they did it all with that same ridiculous grin that Riley Voss wore when she faced down 12 Gharvani warriors with nothing but a maintenance kit and a dog. Perhaps that grin wasn't so ridiculous after all. Perhaps it was the most terrifying weapon in the galaxy.